Kremlin confirms that North Korea's Kim Jong-un is due to visit Russia. When he does, it'll be his first meeting with the Russian president, and chances are the agenda includes denuclearization. South Korean President Moon Jae-in is in Uzbekistan on the second leg of his tour of Central Asia. He and his Uzbek counterpart look to upgrade their country's ties, especially in medical technology. And reports say the U.S. and China are getting closer to a deal to end their trade war. Top officials from both sides will be crossing the Pacific in the weeks to come to possibly sign a deal by June. It's 4:00 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for joining us on our afternoon broadcast. I'm Devin Whiting. Russia has confirmed that Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin will be having their first summit sometime before the end of the month. No exact date from the Kremlin, but reports elsewhere suggesting it'll be next week in Vladivostok. As for what they'll talk about, experts say nuclear weapons, economic cooperation, and sanctions. Lee Seung-jae reports.
Citing the Kremlin, Russian news service RIA Novosti says North Korean leader Kim Jong-un will visit Russia this month for talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin. The news service, along with other Russian news outlets, reported the North Korean leader will make the visit at Putin's invitation, as announced by Kremlin press release. However, the report did not give further details, including dates or the venue. Speculation has been rising that Kim and Putin will hold their first summit in Russia's far eastern city of Vladivostok next week, when the Russian president travels to the city on his way to China for an international conference. According to Japan's Kyodo News, citing unidentified sources, reports the North Korean leader plans to make a 3-day visit to Russia beginning next Wednesday. It added Kim plans to travel by train and hold a summit with Putin on Russky Island, an island close to Vladivostok. Russian media has also reported the eastern Russian city would be the likely venue, citing some restrictions being imposed at facilities in the city. Japan's Fuji News Network also aired footage of a man presumed to be Kim's protocol chief of staff, Kim Chang-sun, checking a train station in Vladivostok. Experts say the summit will discuss trilateral cooperation between Seoul, Pyongyang, and Moscow, as well as the North lobbying for an international sanctions relief, while Russia will likely call on North Korea to freeze its nuclear weapons program. Putin has publicly supported talks between Pyongyang and Washington, but openly stated that North Korea needs to be given solid security guarantees in return for giving up its nuclear arsenal. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the U.S. Special Representative on North Korea is in Moscow for 2 days of talks. Stephen Biegun met with his Russian counterpart Igor Morgulov on Thursday to discuss bilateral relations between their countries and efforts to achieve North Korea's denuclearization. Russia's foreign ministry said in a press release that there was a detailed exchange of views on the current situation around the Korean peninsula and that the two sides will work actively with all parties to achieve a diplomatic solution. The U.S. government says it's aware of the recent statement from North Korea demanding that Secretary of State Mike Pompeo be removed from the nuclear negotiations. Washington, though, is still ready to engage Pyongyang in constructive talks. That was the response, according to Voice of America, of an official at the State Department. North Korea's state media on Thursday had published a statement attributed to the Director General in charge of North American affairs at the North's foreign ministry. It accused Pompeo of misinterpreting what Kim Jong-un had said recently about giving the U.S. until the end of the year to change its stance. Pompeo, it said, was always ruining things, even when they were going fine. U.S. Acting Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan confirmed North Korea's latest inspection and test fire as a new tactical guided weapons firing test and not a ballistic missile. Speaking to reporters on Thursday, Shanahan added that there was no change to the U.S. military operations or posture as a result of the test. AP reported that this marks the first time a U.S. government official has publicly confirmed North Korea's state media reports on weapons tests. This comes after Pyongyang's state-run Korean Central News Agency reported Wednesday that Kim Jong-un had inspected and directed the weapons test. The day before the test, Kim reviewed an Air Force flight exercise. South Korean President Moon Jae-in has appointed 2 new justices to the Constitutional Court. Lee Mi-sun and Moon Hyung-bae, despite strong protests from the opposition parties. President Moon approved their appointments on Friday while in Uzbekistan. Before leaving on his Central Asia tour, he had asked the National Assembly to adopt reports on their confirmation hearings by Thursday's deadline. Opposition parties have been criticizing Lee's nomination in particular because of her husband's massive stock speculation, which Lee claims she had no part in. But the president can still appoint his nominees without Parliament's consent. An earthquake of magnitude 4.3 has struck in waters off the east coast of South Korea's Gangwon-do Province. The Korea Meteorological Agency says the quake occurred at 11:16 a.m. Korea time in waters 54 kilometers northeast of the city of Donghae. Residents in the region reportedly felt tremors, but there appears to be no damage. The weather agency is looking into what caused the quake. 59 years ago, on April 19, 1960, thousands of demonstrators, mostly college students, took to the streets across the country to rise up against the dictatorship of the time led by Lee Seung-man. To commemorate the historic day, a ceremony is being held at the April 19th Memorial Cemetery. Our Kim Da-mi tells us more.
April 19th here in Korea is commemorated as one of the foundations of Korea's democracy movement. In 1960, citizens' protests for freedom were violently suppressed by the government. 180 citizens were killed and thousands were wounded, fighting for Korea's civil society and democracy. To remember their brave sacrifice, around 2,500 people, including the leaders of the country's ruling Democratic Party and opposition parties, gathered at the April 19 Memorial Cemetery on Friday. Under the event's theme of Democracy, the Path We Walk Together, South Korea's Prime Minister Lee Nak-yeon emphasized why we need to commemorate the day.
Democracy doesn't come for free. Our country's democracy has been achieved through struggles and sacrifices. The sovereignty of the Republic of Korea shall reside in the people, and all state authority shall come from the people.
And at this year's ceremony, the descendants of 40 honorees who sacrificed their lives during the movement have received awards on the honorees' behalf. This is for the first time in 7 years after files related to another democratic movement on March 15th were revealed in 2016. March 15, 1960 was the date of another massive demonstration in Masan City in response to corrupt elections. So from 1960 to today, a total of 1,121 honorees have received awards. In addition to the ceremony in central Seoul, the commemorations will take place nationwide, including in the cities of Busan and Gwangju, along with ceremonies and cultural events. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News.
There was also a reenactment of the events of 59 years ago here in Seoul. The organizers of this and other commemorations want to raise awareness among locals and foreigners. Won Jung-hwan reports.
59 years ago, there was one of the most profound examples of student power of the mid-20th century. To mark this turning point in the nation's history, northern parts of Seoul held various cultural events for the public, showing what the April 19th revolution really meant for the country.
Just like the protests behind me, students back in the 1960s took to the streets demonstrating against the election rigging and demanding the nullification of the election results.
The parade replicated the 1960 march, with people waving the national flag and demanding democratic freedom. The demonstrations, which were a purely voluntary resistance movement by students and the citizens against the government, showed the public how the waves of outrage had spread throughout the country. While this year marks the 7th anniversary of this commemorative event, the mayor of Seoul's Gangbok-gu district, who has organized this for the past 7 years, expressed his bigger hope to share the story of what happened in 1960 with the world.
What we really want is for the April 19th revolution to be registered among the other UNESCO's World Heritage Records. It has already passed the government's evaluation, and we're just waiting for the government to apply to the World Heritage Records.
The organizers have also invited foreign students from Korea University to raise global awareness on how the students from the university bravely stood up against the then government. A group of students read the records of what happened in the past and visit the National Cemetery, where those who were killed or injured during the revolution are buried.
I'm very proud of them that at such a young age to be involved in such a big and significant revolution. Because for me, for my age, I don't think I'll be that brave to be engaged in this revolution.
It's a bit daunting. Like even we read on the letters of the student sending to her mother, and that was just so crazy, the passion and the selflessness that that sacrifice would have to take, yeah.
The government ruthlessly suppressed the demonstrators by declaring martial law and firing live weapons at the unarmed protesters, causing nearly 200 deaths and more than 6,000 injuries. But finally, students and citizens toppled the dictatorship and caused the formation of a new government, proving that the sovereignty of the country belonged to its people just like today. 원정환, 아리랑 뉴스.
South Korean President Moon Jae-in is on a tour of countries in Central Asia. He started in Turkmenistan and now he's in Uzbekistan, where he'll be meeting with his counterpart there. Our presidential office correspondent Shin Se-min reports.
The Uzbek capital of Tashkent is stop 2 of 3 on President Moon Jae-in's first ever tour of Central Asia. During a 4-day state visit consisting of summit meetings with his Uzbek counterpart Shavkat Mirziyoyev, the presidents are likely to focus on ways to upgrade their level of political and economic ties. They will also discuss ways to expand the two sides' practical cooperation in the areas of ICT, medical, and defense technology. Uzbekistan is seen as a profitable market for South Korea, given the country's economy has been logging a steady 5% level of annual growth over the past 3 years. In particular, the two countries' healthcare-related ties are at a level not seen with Seoul's other partner nations. In fact, they are so crucial that the president's first schedule upon his arrival in Tashkent was to visit a university demonstrating a joint remote medical consultation by doctors from the two countries.
특히 이 헬스는 전 세계적으로 가장 유망한 의료 산업 중 하나입니다. 양국이 의료 분야 4차 산업혁명에 함께 대응하는 전략적 파트너가 되길 기대합니다.
South Korea's technological know-how, such as 5G networks and AI, should help Uzbekistan's medical sector, which is hampered by the country's vast size and unique geographical features. During his stay, President Moon will also address members of Uzbekistan's parliament, a first for a visiting South Korean leader. His trip will also take him to Samarkand, one of the oldest inhabited cities in Central Asia, before wrapping up his stay in the country. The South Korean leader's trip comes 2 years after the Uzbek president visited Seoul, and expectations for the talks are high as Uzbekistan is seen as the base to President Moon's new northern policy and is also the most populated Central Asian nation. Shin Se-min, Arirang News, Tashkent.
South Korea's producer prices rose for the second consecutive month in March, mainly due to higher international oil prices. According to the Bank of Korea, the production price index, which is a barometer of future consumer inflation, edged up 0.3% on month. Prices of Dubai crude, Korea's benchmark, rose by 3.6% during the same period. It's time now for a look at the markets on this Friday and a wrap-up of the action this week. And for that, we have on the line Dr. Kim Se-won, professor of economics at Ewha Women's University. Thanks for coming on today, Dr. Kim.
Good afternoon.
So we had an impressive winning streak on the Kospi over the past few weeks, but not quite an all-time record since the markets did finally take a breather yesterday. Take us through what happened this week in Korean stocks.
Well, as a whole, this week's stock market was not as good as last week, with the end of 14 straight day rise. In the case of Kospi, Friday index decreased by almost 1.2% compared to Monday's index. I think Bank of Korea provided negative news in the equity market with a decreased GDP forecast from 2.6% to 2.5%. So that led institutional investors and foreign investors to more sell stocks.
Got it. Well, yeah, as you say, the Bank of Korea news coming out there deciding to keep interest rates steady at 1.75%. Now, that was widely expected, but then the BOK also lowered its GDP growth forecast to just 2.5%. What was behind those decisions, and what do they mean to investors?
Actually, Bank of Korea's interest decision, which is not changing interest rate at 1.75%, is already reflected in the market a long time ago. So it did not give impact on the equity market. But as we talked about, Bank of Korea's decreased forecast of GDP growth gave I think, huge impact on the market because the decreased forecast of the GDP growth came out of additional 6 trillion won government expenditures and other government's expansionary policies.
Right. Well, now changing the topic a little bit, the U.S. released its Beige Book on Thursday, and that gives an outlook of fairly subdued growth going forward. The Fed is also holding steady on interest rates. What do you see in this data?
Oh, well, according to recently released the Beige Book of the United States Federal Reserve, I think the signals on current status of U.S. economy is mixed. In the case of U.S. inflation and employment, the number shows the situation is okay. But in the case of consumer sales, it has been declined over 1%. So we believe that U.S. Federal Reserve will be maintaining pretty neutral position on interest rate. That means they are giving a signal of not changing interest rate for a while until the end of summer.
Yeah, we had been talking for weeks and weeks about interest rates rising, but it seems that's been called off. Now, viewers should also know U.S. markets are closed on Friday, New York time, for Good Friday. But Dr. Kim, we'll have to leave it there this afternoon. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you very much.
Now, the U.S. and China could be closing in on a trade deal, according to President Trump and the Wall Street Journal. They're scheduling another round of talks and reportedly have their eyes on signing in May or June. Cha Sang-mi has more.
U.S. President Donald Trump held out hopes this week that trade talks with China will be a success and the negotiations are moving along quite well. He added, quote, "You'll be hearing about it very, very shortly." This comes after a report by the Wall Street Journal saying the United States and China are scheduling 2 rounds of face-to-face talks in a bid to reach a deal to their protracted trade row by next month, according to people familiar with the plans. Under the tentative timeline, U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin will be traveling to Beijing the week of April 29th, followed by Chinese Vice Premier Liu He making a visit to Washington the week of May 6th. The officials are set to finalize their negotiations so President Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping can sign off on a deal by late May or early June. Beijing is preparing to host more than 40 world leaders at the Second Belt and Road Forum for International Cooperation in Beijing next week. The report comes after Mnuchin's remarks last weekend that 2 sides were nearing a final round of talks. Washington and Beijing are locked in negotiations to draw a line under their 9-month trade tussle. The world's 2 largest economies had reached a truce in their trade war in December of last year. At the time, Washington delayed a decision to impose 25% tariffs on Chinese goods worth some $200 billion. Cha Sang-mi, Arirang News.
The World Trade Organization has ruled in favor of the U.S. and its claim that China's use of tariff-rate quotas for rice, wheat, and corn unfairly limits America's access to the Chinese market. The WTO found China had not been transparent, predictable, or fair in managing the quotas. The case was started by the Obama administration and marks the second U.S. victory over China this year. In February, the WTO ruled that China unfairly subsidized its grain producers. Now, South Korea is set to become a super-aged society by 2026, when over 1/5 of the population will be 65 or older. Our Park Se-young has more on what can be done to prepare for this demographic shift.
The issue of South Korea's aging population is not a new one. In fact, the country is transitioning into a super-aged society faster than any other OECD member. By 2050, for every 100 people in the working age bracket, there will be 73 aged over 65, 20% higher than the OECD average. This means only 36% of the country's total population will be responsible for production and services. To prevent such crisis, the expert who conducted the study says the older generation must actively engage in economic activities.
Because the country's birth rate continues to drop, existing measures such as increasing alternative labor force with women and youth are neither enough nor effective. We have to make the best use out of the existing population.
He added that it is necessary to get rid of mandatory retirement solely based on a certain age and instead reconsider the country's social systems, such as categorizing those aged over 65 as elderly. He also stressed the need to further improve age-friendly labor policies and systems, such as providing lifelong education and allowing retirement based solely on workers' abilities. Park Se-young, Arirang News.
April 20th here in South Korea is a national day for people with disabilities. One thing to consider this year is the way technology is helping people live their lives more independently. Smartphone apps in particular are helping people with navigation, transport, and commerce, as our Choi Si-young reports.
A mobile application that lets the blind hear rather than see. This is the latest assistance service to help disabled people with their daily routines. Named Sullivan Plus, this app narrates objects that blind people photograph with their smartphones so they know what they're looking at.
It's very good. I'd like to do things alone, but until now, I haven't really been able to do so. Now, when some people send me photos, I can translate them into text and hear or see what they are. I am so happy that I can do that.
The app also makes it easier for blind people to visit places like coffee shops. Rather than having to ask the cashier, blind people can use the app to read the menu and the prices. The technology was developed by local software firm Twat, with South Korea's telecom carrier LGU Plus in charge of its market research and distribution. The software firm says it plans to roll out the app on other operating systems.
This app only works on Google's Android, but after requests poured in, we are planning to release a new version compatible with Apple's iOS this year.
A month earlier, LGU Plus and Seoul City teamed up to offer a voice-enabled taxi hailing service for the disabled. All they have to do is to talk to an AI speaker to book a wheelchair-accessible taxi. Since 2003, Seoul City has been running a taxi service for persons with grade 1 to 2 brain disorders or physical disabilities. And the city has taken this service to the next level with the latest AI technology offered by the telecom firm. To mark National Day of the Disabled this Saturday, Seoul will make the taxi service free for the day. Choi Si-young, Arirang News.
And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thanks for being with us. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.